I'd like to begin by addressing the question, what are the signs of spiritual progress, or even why do we ask about spiritual progress at all? The only valid way, really, to think about spiritual progress is insofar as the answer to that, am I spiritually progressing, encourages you. Because very often the question of spiritual progress comes up as a sign of discouragement. I don't feel I'm progressing that much. If I were, I would know, and so on. And so really we have to be thinking of it from the answers, from the point of view of how can we encourage ourselves? How can we be reassured? How can we find ways and guideposts to improve, rather than just worrying about, well, look at this person, they must be spiritually advanced. As one friend of mine asked me once, I have this friend, other friend, and he's very spiritually advanced. I said, how do you know? And he said, well, he has all these visions of light and all these things. And I said, but how do you know that spiritual advancement? And how do you know how the inside of his head or heart compares to the inside of yours? How do you know? And so it made him take a step back and think about that a little bit, and we'll be getting into that in a moment. I wanted to begin with a quote. Swamiji wrote of the time when he was a disciple with Yogananda, and when I say Swamiji, I mean Swami Kriyananda, and when I say Master, I mean Paramahansa Yogananda. One day a brother disciple of mine was asked to dig a deep hole for a septic tank. He dug all day, never stopping to see how far he had come. At the day's end, much to his own and everyone else's surprise, the hole had been finished. That, Master said, is the way to find God. Keep on digging and digging, never worrying how far you have come. Then, suddenly, one day, you will find yourself there. And I wanted to share also a quote from Yoganandaji. This is very important, so please take these words to heart. Master used often to say, if you plant a seed, then keep digging it up to see how it is doing, it will never be able to grow. You must leave it in the ground and water it daily. Then it will surely grow in its own time. So also with the path to God. Plant the seed of divine aspiration. Don't dig it up constantly to see how it is doing, but water it daily with meditation and with divine actions. See also that you surround it with a protective hedge of good company. In time, your little seed will grow into a mighty tree of self-realization, affording shade and shelter to every passing wayfarer. But remember, if you dig up the seed constantly, you may only succeed in killing it. Doubt is one of the greatest hindrances on the path to God. And I wanted to mention that because, again, when we're asking ourselves, how am I doing, what are the signs of my spiritual progress and so on, it often comes from a lingering doubt. A doubt about the spiritual path, a doubt about our worthiness on it. That's one of the silliest doubts. How can we be unworthy for the spiritual path? As Master said, everyone in the world is on the spiritual path. Everyone has come out from God. Everything has come out from God and is on its way back. And He who set up this whole universe and this whole show, this whole game show, you might say, don't you think He wants you to win? So of course we're all worthy to find God. But of course, at the same time, we feel our limitations. We feel we've 5 steps forward, 7 steps back sometimes it seems, and so we can get discouraged. But above all, it's important to try to avoid doubting the spiritual path we've chosen, and also to avoid doubting our own worthiness, even if we're the worst person in the world. And think about how much ego it takes to think that you're the worst person in the world. Think of all the other people who want to be the worst person, and you're crowding them out, saying, no, I'm the worst. Of course, I'm joking. But the thing is that when we doubt ourselves, when we feel that way, and when we feel the worst, all we can do is go forward. And I promise you, you're not the worst. So I wanted to address this too, because doubt is so common. Even Arjuna expressed his doubts to Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. And this is from the end of chapter 6. Arjuna said, "O Krishna, what happens to one who is unsuccessful in yoga practice, who tries devotedly to meditate but finds himself unable to bring his mind under control? Does he not become like a riven cloud, scattered and dispersed, unable to find Brahman, and equally unable to return to the delusory world he rejected? Please release me permanently, O Krishna, from these doubts. Who else but you can banish my uncertainty?" The Blessed Lord said, "O Arjuna, my son, one who performs right actions can never be destroyed. Whether in this world or the next, his fate will never be evil. A fallen but sincere yogi gains entry after death into the world of the virtuous. This, in other words, the astral world. He may remain there for many years. Afterward, he is reborn on earth into a good and prosperous home. On the other hand, he may reincarnate on earth in a family of enlightened yogis. Such a birth in this world, however, is difficult to attain. One of the reasons being is that married yogis often choose not to have children. In his new family, he recovers the yogic discrimination he attained formerly and sets himself with even greater zeal to achieve final spiritual liberation." Now I want to pause here for a moment, and I want to ask you a question. Here I have been reading about what happens to the yogi in his next life if he doesn't make it. And if you've been thinking, okay, well, I better listen carefully to this section because this is going to be me in this life, I want you to not think that way. In fact, instead, it's better to think of, this is what happened to me in the last life. In the last life, I was a sincere yogi. In the last life, I meditated deeply and sought God. And that is why, in this life, I have picked up the spiritual path so readily and so quickly. And even if you've come late into your life, there was a devotee of Yogananda's who was an atheist all her life and took up the spiritual path at the age of 80. And in the few years remaining to her, Master said she found God, she found liberation. So you don't know what karma you had to pay off before getting onto the spiritual path. I know someone who got on the spiritual path at the age of 20 and said, "Oh my God, all the time I've wasted up until now." So don't worry about timing, and in particular, think of these next stanzas as applying to you from the last life, and now this life is the retaking up of that spiritual practice. So again, Krishna says to Arjuna, "The power of former yoga practice is sufficient to impel, as it were, the reborn yogi on his upward path. Even one who seeks only a theoretical understanding of yoga is more highly advanced than one who is dedicated to outward scriptural or Vedic rites. Diligently following his chosen path and cleansing himself thereby of all sin or karmic debts, the yogi after many births attains perfection and enters at last into the supreme beatitude. The yogi is greater than those ascetics who strive for spiritual perfection through discipline of the body, greater even than those who follow the path of wisdom or jnana yoga, or of action, karma yoga. Become, O Arjuna, a yogi." And I can't help but adding, reminds me of a time when I was at Ananda's Expanding Light Temple and we were having a yoga teacher training program, and I wasn't a member of the training at that time, but I was with the students in a particular presentation on the Bhagavad Gita. And these students had been studying anatomy and physiology, the different asanas of Hatha Yoga, and for many of them it was new. They were perhaps physical therapists or new massage or other things, and this was a way really to go deep into Hatha Yoga and to become able to teach the postures. And when this, from the Gita, this statement was read, "Become, O Arjuna, a yogi," one woman turned to me and she said, "Become a yogi? Like, it doesn't really say that, does it? I mean, we're like yoga postures. He doesn't say become a yogi, does he?" Yes, he does. It's a lot more than yoga postures. You're in perhaps for deeper than you bargained. So, having said all this then, I don't want you to feel that I've cheated you out of a talk on what are the signs of spiritual progress without mentioning any of them. There are, in fact, signs of spiritual progress. And these are given to us by Swami Kriyananda. And again, though, I want to reiterate, and as he writes here, the signs of spiritual progress can be considered constructively only as guidelines to our present endeavor, and not as depressing reminders of how far we still have to go, nor as ego balm for the semi-enlightened. So again, the only useful way to answer this is to find the ways that it can encourage us and guide us, guidelines in what we should do, not to be depressed about, oh my gosh, I don't do this, and I don't do this, and I don't do this, and also not to say, well, I think I am fairly enlightened. Not bad, I just gave myself an evaluation and came up just fine. Remember, when you have God, then you're doing just fine. Until that time, let's keep on seeking. I say this because a friend of mine who is very sincere was at a spiritual conference, and she was meeting all these people who were very spiritually advanced, so they told her. And I prayed and found a parking space, and then I had this experience where my windshield cracked, and then I found on the dashboard a business card from a person who fixes windshields. I mean, can you believe it? And then I saw these lights over here, and they were guiding me over to the McDonald's or whatever it was. Probably not McDonald's, maybe Whole Foods. These are perhaps some of these are American jokes. I've been too long in America, I think. So instead say they were guiding me over to Saramana Bhavan, maybe. But the thing is that let's put it this way. Master said, he who says he is one with God isn't. And then he also said, he who says he isn't. Meaning, it's not something we speak about. And it's not something the yogi is ever certain of, or at least the master is certain of his union with God, but even then he speaks of it only gently. And all these outward signs can be encouraging as signs of God's love for us, surely, but not so much then if we take it, as Swami says, as ego balm, as encouragement for our egos to swell. And if there's time at the end, I'll get into that point, because it's a subtle point as well, dealing with nirvikalpa and savikalpa samadhis, the two stages of samadhi. So, back to this here, the signs of spiritual progress, 1. If you are experiencing the growing sense that God's is the only power in life. And how would that manifest? Perhaps in terms of having a financial crisis, worrying about money, and do we turn immediately to our financial plan or to our friends for a loan or something, or do we begin with a prayer to God? You help me sort this out, because it's by your power that any of this income comes to me, that I am sustained only by your power, and therefore you have to help me. And similarly, related to this, why is it a growing sense? Because this understanding must be dynamic, not passive. We can't reach a certain point in our spiritual progress and say, okay, I've progressed this far and it's enough. Or I'm fairly content. Not content, because contentment is a very important spiritual quality, but I'm complacent. I become self-satisfied with how far I've come. Swamiji said it's one of the biggest dangers on the spiritual path once you've gotten through the initial stages, to say, my, look how much I have spiritually progressed. Not bad. I remember when I was a real wreck, and now I think I'm pretty much with God. So we have to not be content. once Swamiji had a little spiritual experience which was very thrilling for him, and he told Master about it, and Master said, "That's nothing." And Swamiji was shocked at first, but then he realized Master didn't want him to become satisfied with just a touch of bliss, just a touch of bliss, just a little nibble. He wanted him to go for the whole feast, and so therefore said, "Keep going." So, continuing on here, related to what I was saying about finding the parking place and all these things, another sign of spiritual progress is not psychic phenomena. It can be very tempting if you see lights, if you hear sounds, to then think, well, I must be progressing. And in fact, what's more common we hear is that I heard that someone was seeing lights and hearing sounds, and therefore I feel bad. Because if they're having all those experiences, then I must be way, way far behind them on the spiritual path. It's not true. Again, psychic phenomena, which are really astral phenomena mostly, they can be experiences of God too. But for the most part, these are certainly blessings and certainly things to encourage us. However, not to discourage us by their absence. In fact, Swamiji makes the point that there was a disciple, brother disciple of his, who ended up leaving the path. And he had tremendous spiritual experiences that he's shared with Swamiji. And Swamiji even came into his room and found him on the bed, not breathing, with his heart stopped. And then after a time he came out of that state and said, "I was having the most wonderful meditation." So how could it be? What's the explanation that he would have these experiences and then leave the path? It wasn't that he thought it was so easy, so why put more effort into it? That sometimes is what happens if we have these experiences in the beginning, that we can think, well, that's great, and then now I don't have to work for it. That is Divine Mother trying to entice you to get on the spiritual path, and then once you're hooked, then she says, great, now it's time to start the work. But in terms of this disciple of brother disciple of Swamiji's, Swamiji's explanation is that sometimes our superconscious mind will seize that we're in danger of leaving the spiritual path and gives us more spiritual experiences, trying to keep us on the path. So that can be sometimes the reason for it. Now, I don't want you to say, oh my gosh, I had a spiritual experience. Does that mean I'm about to leave the path? No. And also, if you hear about a friend of yours who's had this great experience, say, oh yeah, you better watch out. It's not like that. But at the same time, it only matters what's happening to us. Swamiji said, I believe, that he went his whole life without even seeing the spiritual eye. And then he added, but I feel bliss, and that's the important thing. And so remember that too. Either if you are having these experiences, again, take them as divine blessing, but don't talk about them, because it dissipates the energy of them, and also it sometimes can draw unhelpful attention to oneself. I have to mention this painting is a painting of Dana Anderson, who is a Nanda member and runs a studio called, well, I'm not sure what her studio is called, but her website is called awakeningarts.com, and she's painted many things. I use this image sort of as a showing psychic phenomena, so I'll use another painting of hers later to show God, so to be fair to her. So, more signs, and this is the most important thing in a way. Right attitude. Right attitude is everything. And why do I say that? Because we can say, yeah, people always say right attitude is everything because they want us to behave better. And it's not true. It's to our own advantage that we have the right attitude and that we behave better. But here's this point that I was referring to earlier about Sabhikalpa versus Nirbhikalpa Samadhi. These are the two stages of merging into God. When you attain Nirbhikalpa Samadhi, you merge into God and are free. And that's it. You graduated. There's no going back. No one can take that diploma from you. You stay free. You remain free. So that's the first stage of enlightenment that we are all pursuing. Master said, everyone drawn to this spiritual path should seek Nirbhikalpa Samadhi in this lifetime. Now, The stage before that is called Sabikalpa Samadhi. And what that means is that we merge with God in meditation and in this state of Sabikalpa Samadhi. But then when we come out of that meditation, we return to the ego. And the ego at that point, having just merged in God for a time, has two choices. It can either say, I was just one with God. Or it can say, I was just one with God. Well, I always knew it. And if you have any questions for God, you could just ask me. Save you some time. I'll be happy to answer them. You see, that is, and what's the difference between saying, I was just one with God, I, the ego, swelled to infinity, which is impossible, and from that Sabikalpa state, devotees fall repeatedly, over and over again. In fact, it's the last test on the spiritual path. Because once you pass that test and don't return to the ego, well, it's sort of like throwing out the boomerang that never comes back. It just goes on to infinity. We merge into Nirvikalpa Samadhi. So in this difference between saying, I was just one with God and I was just one with God, emphasizing God, that is a question of attitude. So when we practice right attitude now, not only does it bring great rewards in our lives, but it also helps us prepare for that final test on the path of focusing more on God than on ourselves in the last experience, or the last test, I should say. So, are you becoming more calm? Are you becoming more kind, more self-giving, more calm? Are you relinquishing likes and dislikes? I can't help but mention here, a friend of mine said that I am halfway on the spiritual path, halfway done. I've relinquished all my likes. I have only dislikes now. Of course, he was kidding, but sometimes we have days like that where all we have is dislikes. And then again, are you learning to accept life's ups and downs even-mindedly? If your love for God is growing ever deeper, know that you are fast approaching Him. And if through all the trials of life you always feel joy inwardly, a joy that nothing can shake, know that you have Him already to a wonderful degree. So now we come, of course, to the question of how. It's all very nice, and these are important states to contemplate, but how do we achieve them? And so, certainly affirmations and positive thinking are helpful and necessary. And I would say primarily they work with reprogramming our subconscious mind. Those negative thoughts, habit patterns that say, I'm no good, or I don't think I can do it, or look at all these things that I have going wrong with me. Just sweep them out of the way with positive affirmations, positive thinking. I am a child of God. The Nirvikalpa Samadhi, or freedom, liberation, is my birthright. God, you got me into this mess, get me out of it. Show me the way. And with strong affirmation, we can push these things away. Then also, we can, if we are experiencing, how? By increasing the flow of our energy. Energization exercises, for example, finding ways to keep our energy up and increasing that flow again. And then finally, from divine contact in meditation. And this is really an important point, because it isn't, in other words, affirmations, positive thinking, require a bit of self-effort, self-will. Okay, I'm positive. And sometimes we can use too much will. In other words, willpower and intensity does not have to imply tension. And similarly, with increasing the flow of energy, I will increase this flow of energy. I feel my energy dipping. Oh no, I'm losing my spiritual progress. No, not like that. The thing is, or practicing the right attitudes. Again, I will always practice the right attitude. I will do the right thing in all circumstances. I will not react. I will not feel. Doesn't work. Just try it. It doesn't work. As Swamiji said, suppression is not helpful. Self-control is helpful. Suppression is not helpful because the thing just ends up coming out in a weird way later on. So, the thing is, there's a shortcut, and that is this divine contact in meditation. when we feel the peace of meditation, then when we come out of it, we often act with the right attitude naturally. It is our nature to behave, to be kind, to be considerate of others, to emanate peace, to want to share it. The nature of calmness, you could say, is to also to spread out and expand and include others in that calmness. So it doesn't require necessarily, I have to memorize all the signs of spiritual progress and obey them. It just requires the divine contact and meditation, which naturally brings you these right attitudes. Of course, it's helpful to work on the ones that aren't coming so naturally, but still, know that every time you meditate, you are chipping away at the ego. As Master said, every time you meditate, you are burning off some karma. You are removing some of the bondage that's keeping you from being free. And so keep that in mind and be encouraged by that, as I'm sure you are, because if you've been meditating, you've already found what a difference it makes in your life. Now, if there's one person who says, I've been meditating and I haven't found any improvement, then if you haven't seen it, then maybe ask your family. Sometimes our families and friends can be a better gauge of how we've been changing without realizing it. One child said to his mother, after she had begun a meditation class and also complained that nothing was happening, he said, "But Mommy, you're nicer now." And so we can get feedback from the universe if we're not seeing it directly in ourselves. So, Swamiji makes this statement: the most important thing to bear in mind is that what truly matters is not what God is giving you in terms of visions and consolations, but rather what you are willing of yourself to give Him. And why is this the most important thing? Is it because it all comes back down to us and we have to do the work, and so really don't think about what you're getting from God, just think about what you're giving to Him, because that's what a good devotee thinks? Well, in fact, it is what a good devotee thinks, but also it is what brings spiritual progress. It is what brings all of these experiences. It is the how of attaining enlightenment, which is the more we are willing to give of ourselves, the more God comes to us. A disciple of Master's complained, why is it that these others have all these spiritual experiences and I have none? And Master said, if you shut me out, how can I come in? And of course it means shutting him out of her heart. And there's another story, a beautiful story, of a beggar in Bengal who it's a poem by Rabindranath Tagore. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, but basically, to just summarize it, a beggar was outside his home or on the street, and the king came before him in his carriage and all his retinue, all his servants, and the beggar thought, how wonderful it is, now my day has come. And the king stretched out his hand and said, what have you, I'll turn this back to me here for a second, what have you to give me? And the beggar thought, what do I have to give you? I mean, you are the king and I have nothing. But since the king had asked, he found in his little pouch, the beggar found the tiniest grain of rice that he had collected that day, and he put it in the king's hand. And the king accepted it unquestioningly and got back into his carriage and went off. And then that night, when the beggar was emptying out his pouch of all the things he had collected, he found the tiniest grain of gold. And in that moment, his heart swelled and he cried out, if only I had given everything. And that's how it is with God. Everything we give Him turns to gold, if not literally, in the sense also of not always having a positive outcome. Sometimes we offer ourselves or enter a situation that's quite difficult, and we ask for God's help and it gets worse. And sometimes, though, when we go through a great tragedy or a great difficulty that doesn't appear to have any happy ending as yet, it's because a great karmic burden is being removed from us. In some sense, it's valid to say this is because of my bad karma. That's a common thought, a common complaint And one might even say a common superstition. Master said, I'm tired of hearing people complain about their karma. In other words, don't be bound by karma. But it is a valid thing to say, this is happening to me because of my bad karma, and this is expiating it. This is paying it off. In other words, I have to go through this experience, fine. And then I should feel the burden of that karma lifted. Not multiplied, or not the tiniest dent put into it, but gone for that particular karma, for that particular situation. So again, be encouraged. I'd like to give you, I'm warning you, I'm going to be asking you for questions soon, so I hope you have them ready. And if not, now's the time to scramble and come up with something. I wanted to share another quote from Master because, again, the question of spiritual progress is so natural. It's for this reason that Master asked this question, I believe, to his guru, Swami Sri Yukteswar. This was after Yoganandaji had had the experience of Samadhi, Nirvikalpa Samadhi, and even beyond. And still, after that experience, he asked, perhaps on a human level, or perhaps for the sake of all of us humans, he asked his guru, I want to know, sir, when shall I find God? And Sri Yukteswarji replied, you have found him. And Master said, oh no, sir, I don't think so. And then he said, my guru was smiling. Sri Yukteswarji said, I'm sure you aren't expecting a venerable personage adorning a throne in some antiseptic corner of the cosmos. I see, however, that you are imagining that the possession of miraculous powers is knowledge of God. One might have the whole universe and find the Lord elusive still. Spiritual advancement is not measured by one's outward powers, but only by the depth of his bliss in meditation. And so if you get one thought from this whole seminar today, let it be this one. Spiritual advancement is not measured by one's outward powers, but only by the depth of his bliss in meditation. And just to go into it a little bit deeper, something a little bit more to wrap our minds around, Yoganandaji listed 8 manifestations of God. And these are, as you see here, light, sound, love and joy, power and wisdom, peace and calmness. And I've arranged them in a circle, and you might ask what's in the center of the circle, and I would say bliss, the divine contact with God that brings all of these experiences in different ways. And or if you experience only bliss and none of these others, which I don't think is possible, but still, that's what these indicate. Now, therefore, if you are feeling increasing peace or calmness or love in your heart, then know this is an experience of God. And I did want to recall your attention to this. Of course, this is Arjuna with Krishna in front, riding the chariot. And by the way, there are 5 horses there because the horses represent the 5 senses. And so it also represents that when we are on the spiritual path, we must hold the reins to the 5 senses and control them, not be controlled by them. And behind them is what's called the spiritual eye, this white star in a blue field surrounded by a golden halo. This is what comes to devotees in deep meditation. And this image is universal. It's portrayed in Christianity sometimes by seeing a white dove or a white bird with its wings spread apart and its tail feathers spreading at the bottom, showing, and its head making the 5th point of the star, and it's a white dove on a blue circle. And when we asked a glass blower in Italy, some members of Ananda Italy went to Murano in Italy where they blow the glass, and said, please make this. And the one man they went to said, what is that? He said, I see that every night when I go to sleep, but I always wondered what it is. You know something about it. And so they explained to him that what it was, the spiritual eye, and he was very encouraged by this. So again, it's a universal experience in the sense that if you see something, you may end up seeing that. It's not a universal experience in the sense that everyone should see it to be worth anything. I hope that point has come through clearly by now. If you hear sound, you may hear ultimately, the ultimate expression of that is the sound of Om. You may also hear the sounds of the chakras. Those of you with the Om technique, practice your Om technique and tune into the sounds of the chakras and also to the deeper vibration of Om. Love, when you experience love, sometimes you weep without expecting to, uncontrollably, in the middle of meditation. Sometimes it even feels painful. If that's the case, it's because a hurt is being released from your heart. A pinch, a twist in your heart that has been there is now ready to be let go of. And so that can be the reason for a painful release. But often it's a joyful and loving release. And again, speaking of joy, if you feel more joy not only in meditation but just in general. A friend of mine was saying to another, she was very worried about her exams, and the other one was sort of nodding like, but didn't seem to really be feeling the depth of her pain. And she said, what is it? Why are you so calm? And he said, since I've been practicing Kriya, that worrying part of my mind has just gone off. I just don't worry the way I used to. And so again, peace and calmness are manifestations of God. Peace is when we feel recharged, like the cessation of noise, the cessation of outer stimulation, overstimulation, and that deep healing spring or drink of peace replenishes us. Calmness is a dynamic form of peace. It's that calmness then that radiates outward in ever-expanding circles and includes others. Also, you may find that people around you are feeling more calm because of the calmness that you're radiating. Or you may find it in subtler ways. They may not be saying, wow, I'm feeling calmness radiating outward from you. But they may just want to be around you. Or you may see them responding to you in different ways. Or, sometimes it's fun, you may find that more people are coming up to you asking you for directions than ever used to. Why? There's something in your aura, there's something in your magnetic field that makes you more approachable. This is a person who can help me. I can't tell you also how many times I've been walking around a store and had someone come up to me and say, do you work here? Can I ask you something? I'm trying to find this. And, sometimes I try to help them. Sometimes they ask for something that's right there in front of us on the shelf, whether you're with diet pills or vitamins or something. So anyway, there are other gains too on the spiritual path, but this is one of them. And lastly, power and wisdom. This power you feel again, that God's is the only power in the universe. In comparison to that, our human powers are just nothing. And I don't just mean our individual, I mean our collective power of humanity. We're so proud of the things we've done, and yet they're nothing without God. They couldn't have been done without God's will. And really, He's the one running this whole show. It's our job to get out of it, not to perfect the show. As a song Swamiji wrote, the words to it go, the wonders that man did carve out of stone and wove out of music, then called them his own, did last a brief hour, as in Greece and in Rome. It was grace at last that did free us, when our souls sought love alone. And lastly, the experience of wisdom. The devotee feels that anything I pray to God about, I will get an answer. Sometimes that answer comes mentally, intellectually, verbally. Sometimes it comes in the heart. We don't necessarily have the whole reasons fleshed out. We can't explain why. We have this intuition, this wisdom of the heart that is guiding us. I know this is the right thing to do. And when I find out, when I do that thing, maybe I'll find out why it was the right thing to do and what is the next right thing to do. Living with God and being guided that way. And our ultimate goal, of course, is freedom in God. And this is Dana Anderson's painting, which you probably well recognize. It's the cover of the Essence of the Bhagavad Gita. Swamiji asked her to paint a painting representing the divine vision. I believe that's the title of this painting. And it's, well, there it is right there, the divine vision. So, thank you very much. And now it's your turn to please ask your questions.
Thank you, Dharmarajan. We do have a few questions coming from online. The first is, how can I increase the depth of my meditations? I get distracted by thoughts easily.
If you can, one simple solution is to chant. If you have a harmonium, which of course you may not, actually in India a lot of people have harmoniums lying around. It was encouraging for us to discover that. If you have a harmonium, maybe your parents or your grandparents, learn a few chants. You can learn them online. Many simple chants. The harmonium is very easy to play. You can also play a CD recording of a chant, and that also, you can sing along with that, because it opens the heart. When the heart is opened and the energy is flowing through it, the mind becomes much calmer and meditation becomes much easier. Master said chanting is half the battle. Another thing you can do is practice the energization exercises if you know them. If not, you can learn them. Or some other form of physical yoga practice that increases the energy flow in the body and relieves mental tension. Because often physical tension can lead us to that mental restlessness. And these are all ways we're doing of helping the mind. Remember, in your question about mental restlessness, it was the same question Arjuna asked Krishna, saying, I find the mind as difficult to control as the wind. So, it's a pretty common question among devotees, and Arjuna was the prince of devotees, as it says. But he was also a great master, playing the role of a devotee for our sake. But there's a subtle truth or teaching in that too. The mind is as difficult to control as the wind, because the wind in the body is the breath. And so that's the secret that the yogis discovered, that by controlling the breath, either through pranayama or through a technique like Hong Sa, if you're familiar with it, then the mind would follow the breath's calmness. It's hard to control the mind with the mind, because the mind is already out of control. But the breath will automatically then calm the mind. And if all of these things are things you've tried and aren't working, then all I can say is, well, it's a universal complaint for all of us. We're all struggling with this. And maybe join a group meditation if there's one near you. If there's not one physically near you, then I think we have guided meditations online through Ananda India, 1 day a week or something like that. You can check the schedule on the website anandagorgan.org/online to tell you where you can meditate with one of the acharyas and also with other people who are meditating in the online community. So I hope that helps you. Other questions?
Thank you. We do hear a lot of people speaking about spiritual experiences, about Kundalini rising, etc. Is it not right to try and will for those kind of experiences during our meditation?
That's a very good question, because obviously we want divine awakening, we want the things that lead to divine awakening, and of course to become divinely awakened, we need to raise the Kundalini. The question is how to do it, and also in what way to seek it. If you say, God help me with this experience so that I can have more of you, then that's perfectly fine. But even in that you can see the hole in it, saying, God, I want to come closer to you. If it is your will to give me these experiences, I want them. But I only want them insofar as they bring me closer to you, because that's the point. Again, it's not because that's what the goody two-shoes on the spiritual path say. Because if we seek them with the wrong motivation, well, then we may get them, and then we lose them. There are many techniques that force the Kundalini up prematurely, but if there hasn't been a similar development of moral development and opening of the chakras, then the energy can rise easily but fall easily. Can I give you back control of the screen so it can be full video? Yeah. Okay. So seek them, but again, seek them for God. And on the other hand, in terms of raising the Kundalini, some people do ask. In fact, if I do this, does that help? Yes. Okay. Some people do say, well, should we even practice yoga? I mean, yoga attempts to raise the Kundalini, and should we not even attempt to do that? Because it is perhaps unnaturally working with the Kundalini. No, of course not. The yogis have given us safe techniques for raising the Kundalini. The Kundalini is going to rise anyway as you progress spiritually. Why not practice techniques that can help it to do so? So, yes, definitely do it, but do it in the right way. Do it in the safe way. Do it in a permanent way. That isn't just another up and down of life. And I've met some people who have had difficult experiences from raising the Kundalini artificially and too forcefully, and have really burned out their nervous systems as a result, with not an easy healing. So be careful, but you can trust by and large the guidance of the great yogis.
Thank you. We have another question coming from online. How can we reduce the need for company, and become more independent?
Well, that's also a good question. And it really depends on what kind of company we're in and what we're gaining from that company. If it is from a dependence on other people, worldly people, or our family that may not be as supportive of our spiritual efforts, though they may be good and sincere people, but may see us more in terms of a part of them, a part of their unit, and also in what we can give to them. It is difficult to find ways to become independent of that. The most important thing is to become independent inside. And whether we can extricate ourselves outwardly easily, sometimes that's a question of karma. Sometimes we can. For some of us, there is a need to make a great separation and say, that's it, I need to be on my own, and I'm doing so today. For most of us, though, that independence comes more gradually, more gently. You will find that as you meditate, as you take time for yourself, sometimes you can drive somewhere and stay there. You don't have to come home right away, or in between the office and home, maybe you can stop somewhere and meditate. Take time for yourself. Take personal space that way, and you'll feel your own recharging, and then you'll be in more of a position to give to others than to just feel the draining demands they may place upon you, if that's part of your question. On the other hand, if it's a question about spiritual company, then yes, we can become independent of it, but I don't know if that's desirable. As we said earlier, that to build protective hedges around your spiritual practice of good company, that satsanga is praised as one of the most important things on the spiritual path. Company with other devotees. It helps, their magnetism rubs off on us. Their receptivity to the things that are so close to our own hearts helps us in sharing and increasing our own devotion. So, that's probably not your question, but just in case it is, or someone's question, we want to keep the company of devotees as much as possible, especially as we find that it inspires us, so that we can increase in our own spiritual growth.
We have one more question. If we are blessed with a divine experience, such as hearing Om, seeing the light, how can we sustain the uplifted feelings throughout our day?
Well, that's a very good question. And one important thing to do is to, of course, try to remain as calm as possible. Try to have an easy transition out of meditation, in the sense of sometimes you can go for a quiet walk after meditation and try to hang on to those feelings and incorporate them into your conscious mind, but in a gentle activity that doesn't require too much conscious thinking. If you can't do that, perhaps cooking or cleaning or tidying up or traveling even on a bus. It's a little harder then, but traveling in a vehicle, not if you're driving the vehicle, but again, some kind of activity that transitions you from meditation that doesn't require too much thinking is one way. Another way is to again try to keep the calmness as much as possible. That will also keep the undisturbed mirror of your mind reflecting that experience back to you. Another is to write it down, or in some other way keep it strong in your memory. Swamiji was once asked the question, I feel so much peace around you, and I don't feel peace normally. So what's the quickest way I can feel this peace on my own that I feel when I'm in your physical presence? And Swamiji began with a smile and said, well, it wouldn't hurt you to remember those times that you've been in my physical presence. Again, he didn't see himself as the source of that peace, but saw the person as resonating with something coming through him, coming through Swamiji. But at the same time, it helps very much to remember these experiences. So when we feel, that has gone, rather than thinking of it as having left us, just think of it as, what a gift that was, and keep it strongly in your mind, even as a mental affirmation, even if it no longer is something you're currently experiencing, because that also keeps it close. That keeps it close also, it literally, but keeps it also mentally, instead of close mentally, instead of pushing it away, saying, oh, I've lost it, it will never come back, then that's not helpful. So these are just a few tips.